Hello everyone, this is Windrider. I have my assistant here running the camera asking me to question Zombie Slayer. I also have a few other helpers here. We got Blackie. This is Zombie Slayer's cubby here. Also Zombie Slayer has Cubby here. He's going to be helping me with some of these questions. Hey, stand up there, Cubby. And we got Bear, the mother of them all. But Zombie Slayer wouldn't help me if I didn't show off his little bears. But back to our recordings. He's going to ask me a few questions that I have outlined in the ebook. By the way, my name's Steve, affectionately known as Windrider. But I'm going to try to answer a few of your questions. Feel free to go to the websites or email links with any other questions that you might have. But I'll try to give a brief rundown to help along a little bit with your filter building. Okay, Zombie Slayer, I'm ready for the questions. Come over here. What's the first question I think that we have on the ebook?
Okay. My first question for you, Master Windrider, is how do square pieces without professional jigs?
Okay. When you get your kit there are going to be a couple of small little simple things to help square your pieces. It's very important that, especially when you first put the sides on and everything, that you make sure it's square. Number one, if the pieces aren't square up and down, you're going to end up, your seams aren't going to be clear. You're going to end up with bubbles either on one side or the other side of the seams. Also, you want them square to the bottom of the piece so that everything's squared and aligned. If in our shop here, where we build them in quantities, in a lot of shops they build some kind of squares. One of the best squares I find is something I came up with a while ago. Here, listen to that. What I do is I usually build the square. This here keeps it at 90 degrees. If you look real careful, you see the feet here allow it so that the solvent doesn't seep under. This actually keeps it up above the material. I also usually build them so that the spacing is equal to the baffles itself. This here is 6 inches. So if one of your baffles is 6 inches from the side wall, I place it there, I put the side baffle here, and I usually use spring clamps like this. I clamp it here and on this side. Then once I'm done gluing, I can actually put my next baffle here, 6 inches away, clamp it, and be able to glue the baffle right in place with the jig. The main purpose though is to keep it 90 degrees to the surface. Now obviously if you're just building one unit, and you can build this out of wood also, I just choose to use acrylic. I have them in all sizes, anywhere from 4 inches to 15 inches as far as in a shop. If you're looking to build quite a bit of filters for friends, family, maybe for a little profit or something, you might want to just take some of the scrap and build something like this. I might even have some bonus reports on details, but it's pretty simple and straightforward. You glue together any type of box as long as you put feet on the bottom to keep it up. Because if it isn't, obviously the solvent would seep under and glue the jig to the filter, and that would be an issue right there. A quick way though, if you just have one of the ways that I tend to use is I just use a simple square. If you look here, I love these little 6-inch squares. I use them for about anything. But you could literally just place this up against the plastic piece and just carefully hold it there, keeping it square. You needle your plastic, pull the needles, and actually then move it up to this, even just for a couple of minutes, and it will hold itself in there. The only downfall of something like this is applying solvent and the weights. If you notice with something like this, since it's holding it in place, it allows you then to place weight on top to put pressure, and the pressure does help, especially for any bubbles coming up as it's drying. But generally, if you needle carefully, applied your solvent, pulled your needles carefully, and the edges are prepared properly, you're not going to get any bubbles even without the weights. You can use just about any type of squaring jig. You could have actually taken this and glued a piece of acrylic or wood, or even double side taped this to a piece of block wood, and that way it stands by itself, which makes it very easy. You just put your side there, hold it, glue it with the needles, hold it in place, put it there, and just it stands by itself, and it will hold the piece square. You can do it with the same thing with a piece of wood. Just take a piece of wood here and a piece of wood here, nail it together, put a little foot on the wood, maybe a little weight or a brick to hold it down. Here, I use these bricks here. Let me move Cubby here. Actually, I'll just put Cubby here, right here for the moment. He'd be with his friends. But we had talked about this earlier, that the bricks we use, we cover with duct tape. And we use different size bricks. I have smaller ones, bigger. I even have a lot longer ones, but it's great. And with the same thing here, if you just place this down here, you can place the brick here to hold it in place. That way you don't have to worry about holding your side up. But it is important that we keep the side square. Okay. Any other questions that you might have, or details or photos that you might have, feel free, just email me. I am available to you, to help you out with your aquarium filter building needs. What else do we have on the sheet, Zombie Man?
Zombie Slayer.
Sorry.
Well, Master Wind Rider, my second question is how to practice vacuuming a bottle.
Okay. I tried to go at lengths to explain how to use a glue bottle. In a shop atmosphere, when we have a lot of people doing, we actually spend quite a bit of time teaching them. But it's a relatively simple concept. We use these Craftiques bottles. There are other bottles out there. I like the 2-ounce bottles. But the main thing that was shown in there is that what they mean by vacuuming is that we squeeze the bottles, squeeze most of the air out, if you can see the side from here. What this does is all we do is tip it, and as the solvent starts to drip out and I lower the bottle, as I release it and the bottle expands, it pulls the solvent back, and that keeps it from dripping. I don't know if you actually be able to see it or something, but what I usually do is I just start practicing, even on cardboard. Are you able to see this down here?
I'm going to move it.
Okay, well, don't bother doing that, but if you squeeze it, take it, and start running a bead of glue right on the cardboard, solvent, and then slowly let go, you'll find that it will pull the solvent back in the needle, and it will stop. Well, this is a lot like when you're gluing the acrylic. You're sitting there and you're gluing across the acrylic. When you're done with the seam, if you don't vacuum it, if you don't practice pulling the solvent back, you're going to end up with drips across your acrylic. Also, you don't want the needle digging into the seam, because what happens is it's already softening up the acrylic and it will clog your needle constantly. A lot of ways around that. If it's clogged, just try to drip some solvent on the tip of the needle. That in itself usually helps unclog it while squeezing it. You can use a flame from a cigarette lighter or something. The heat will usually allow it through. Eventually just replace the needle. They're not expensive or anything, but I try to avoid clogging them. I usually don't actually touch the edge that I'm doing. But it doesn't take too much practice, and with a little practice you can do that. Every time you do a seam, you blow the excess out of the tip by squeezing. Because what happens is, if you have solvent left in the needle, when you tip it over to glue, it just starts dripping right there. And for a good quality seam, you don't want drips all over your units. I mean, it may happen if you rush a bit, etc., but I would definitely spend a little time practicing vacuuming it by squeezing the bottle, by releasing it, and learning to make sure you control the solvent before you ever do any seam. I would also then, if you have any scrap pieces, which you can pick up at any distributor, little scraps, for nothing, practice gluing those scraps before you do your own filters. Especially if you're going to start doing filters in some volume. You're in an aquarium club, it helps to buy all your acrylic together. We have kits too that are a lot less expensive if you're not into going to buy a lot of sheets, or if you don't have table saws and things to cut it. You can get the pieces already done with the edges finished and build the kit yourself and save some money. But either way, you want to practice vacuuming the bottle and getting it pretty clear of drips before you do any of your glue seams. I hope that helped. As I said, please email me anytime. I'll help as much as I possibly can. What else we have? Zombie Slayer.
Domesino. What do homemade shims look like?
Well, I don't know if I want to use the word homemade shims. Shimming's quite important because one of the biggest problems is no one has a flat, perfectly flat table. And when you have a seam prepared, you have your jigs holding it and it's 90 degrees. If you get down on your knees and look straight into the seam, you're going to see little gaps. You know, the table's dipping slightly, and it's important to shim them up. I believe I showed that pretty well in the videos. A lot of things to use as shims. I have some examples here of just laminate shims. You have little scrap pieces of laminate laying around like in our shop. I just break them in little pieces and I can slide it in the seam. Better yet, even little pieces of acrylic that have been cut on a very slight angle. So it forms a very acute triangle. So as you slide it in, you know, even little razor blades can be used to slide in. You can even go to like Home Depot or Lowe's and buy those packet of wooden shims. The thing about them is they're very long. They're very gradual and they actually work, especially for bigger projects. You might want to break the wood in smaller pieces. The other thing I used to use quite a bit is you get cardboard. Not thick cardboard like I usually lay on the tables for cushioning, but you know, the cardboard that's just very thin, one layer cardboard. I cut little strips of it and I actually fold the cardboard in half. What happens by folding it in half is, if you look carefully, you're forming a triangle. You slide it in, and the farther you push it in, the more it shims, because it actually forms a triangle. And that works very well. See that? Good cardboard would be here. Let me show you, like a file folder. Everyone has file folders like this. It's just cut strips of this very thin cardboard and you fold it in half. Actually, I'll even rip one right here to show you. And then when I fold it in half, I can actually slide it under. And if you look, it actually would form a triangle. So the farther I push it in, the higher it would shim up. So any rough cardboard, obviously thin paper is not going to do it, but anything that has some rigidity to it, a little thicker paper, cardboard, you know, as long as it's thin, works well. Actually here, this is perfect right here. See, it's rigid, it's good cardboard. You cut it in strips, fold it in half, see, it would form a triangle. And as I slide the triangle in farther, it shims it greater. That way you have the ability to adjust how much you shim. And as I explained a bit on the video, you don't want to shim too much, as little as possible. You want your weights on there first. You also want to do your shimming while the needles are in, because if your needles are loose at any spot, obviously there'll be a lot of solvent puddling there. After I pull my needles, I actually then additionally shim, because what it does is it actually, with the melted solvent, pushes it tighter together. It won't take too much practice before you'll realize these points. But this is the difference between getting a very high quality, professional, clear, non-bubble seam and some sloppy seam that's going to degrade a couple of months down the road and eventually get cloudy and split on you. These are the important points. With a little practice, you'd be surprised, even in your garage or in a spare bedroom, you'll be able to get a very professional quality seam. Okay, Zombie Man, what else do we got here?
Zombie Slayer.
I don't have the list of questions in front of me.
What is a safe cleaner to use on the acrylic to clean?
Okay, plastic cleaner is always an issue. You won't believe how often people use something like Windex, which is a lot of ammonia, especially Windex brand. If the acrylic is less quality, you know, extruded acrylic, you can easily, with ammonia-based cleaners, end up with crazing, those little fine cracks. Sometimes with the more high-quality acrylics, which is really what you should be using, for filter building. Although as long as it's not an aquarium or something, just a filter, you can usually get away with the less expensive extruded versions of acrylic. But either way, I would avoid cleaning the acrylic, cleaning your edges before gluing, or even cleaning after the unit's been built, with anything with either ammonia or alcohol in it, which most window cleaners do have it. You want something that's safe for plastic, that says it's safe for plastic. If you want to go more professional type cleaners and lines that are designed for plastics, the Novus line's real good. Here's some Novus 1 plastic cleaner. You can get it in some hardware stores. You can order it all over the internet. I probably will have some available on the site, but this is a very good cleaner. The only thing that you want to be sure of with this cleaner is there's like a polish residue in here, okay? And because of that polished residue, do not use it to clean a unit before it's been polished if you polish by flame. And that's a whole nother discussion in itself. But what happens is that residue, if you use a heated flame, will actually burn. So you want a cleaner that doesn't have any polish, especially when you're cleaning the edges, etc. What I use for that is just some type of glass cleaner. There's many brands on the market. But if you read on the back here, which you're not going to be able to, but it says it contains no ammonia, and it says it's safe for plastic. That's what you want. No alcohol preferably, but as long as it says it's safe for plastic and it's not ammonia. Leaves no film. You know, in cases you can buy this usually for $2 a can. But go to the hardware store, Lowe's, whatever. Make sure it says safe for plastic and it's available. It's important because what happens is, before you glue a seam or something, you should clean your plastic. Even dust that is in the seam, on the edge, attracted, you know, when you pull the film off the plastic, it's very staticky. A lot of static electricity. It tends to attract dust. The solvents will actually impregnate the dust in the seam, and it will look like little pit marks. And it will literally have little bubbles in the seam. You want a crystal clear, perfect seam, you got to glue it pretty much dust free. It has to be cleaned. In a pinch, I've just taken a cotton cloth rag and just used water, you know, as long as I get the dust off. But a cleaner that leaves no residue like that is a lot better. As far as, you know, the building is done, once that's done, you're going to want to clean the unit regularly. Obviously, in an aquarium environment, you want something that's safe for the fish also. The Novus polish, for years I've used. I've got it in the filter while it's running. I've never seen it adversely or harm fish or even coral or anything in the reef system. I would say it's safe, but you know, I can't guarantee anything like that. But do keep that in mind if you're cleaning the filter while it's up and running. Obviously, don't use bleach or anything like that on these filters also, but just stay away from ammonia, bleach, strong alcoholic-based cleaners. Make sure it's plastic safe, and you know, it says it right on the can. Okay? What's the next question we got here? Zombie Slayer.
Oh, thank you. What does a good and bad seam look like?
Okay, well, I don't really have a good or bad seam in front of me, but just to give you a verbal description of what we're looking at. When you're done gluing your seam and it has been set overnight at least, you can peel back the film or paper and take a look at it through the front edge and look at what you want to see. Number one, a good seam is crystal clear. You should be able to actually see right through the edge of the material. You shouldn't see any bubbles whatsoever, especially along the edges. You know, a lot of times they'll collect on the edges. A couple of very minor bubbles on the edge won't affect the integrity of the filter. It really won't. Obviously, if there's any bubbles through the seam, it's going to leak at that point. You don't want any water into the seam at all. It will degrade. So obviously with a bad seam, you'll see any bubbles. You'll also, a lot of times, if the seam's what's called dry, meaning there wasn't much solvent in it before you pulled the needles, you'll get like a spider webbing It's as if it's stress crazed right within the seam. There wasn't enough solvent to melt it. It won't be crystal clear, and you'll see these like minute fine little cracks in there. I would, you know, for a filter not under pressure will hold water, but after a while you'll get degradation. It could take 6 months, it could take a couple of months, it could take a year. It all depends on the pressure, the type of acrylic, the brand, the quality, the density of the material, the type of solution that's in there. It also depends on, believe it or not, more than you would realize, how long you let the seam cure. In other words, how long you let it dry before you put water in it. I've always had incredibly good luck with systems that I let sit for a month. No joke. If you read the specs on the solvent, overnight it might reach 97% dry or what have you, but if you actually look at those specs, it will tell you that over a month period it's actually getting that last 1-2%. That can make a difference because the solvent's contracting as it dries. But when you put moisture and water in it, it wants to expand. They fight each other. And that's where the degradation comes. That little cloudiness you see, that breakdown is actually it coming apart, cracking apart. And I've had aquariums that I have manufactured that when I waited 1 month, 2 months before I put water in, years later the seams were flawless. But, you know, if you put water in 3 days later, a year down the road, you see them start to degrade. Gets a little cloudiness. I would let it cure as long as possible. At least a few weeks, honestly. I mean, try, you know, if you're going to do it, you know, add water 3 days, a few days, a week later, fine. It should hold. It shouldn't be an issue, especially with a filter. But if you want to keep them seams perfect year after year, you wait at least a month before you add water to the seams and get a good, nice, clean, clear seam. Okay? What's our next question, Zombie Slayer?
An explanation on how to move baffles to accommodate your setup.
If you look in the how-to video, etc., we're building what we'd call a standard refugium. It has 3 baffles, actually 4, and it has 3 major chambers. We try to keep it pretty simple. The 3 baffles, if you look at the setup there, is pretty done and straightforward. What we do is the first baffle is made up of 2 baffles. And it leaves a little gap there, usually about 4 inches from the bottom. The reason we do that is so that the water enters at about a 4-inch mark. It allows sand, etc. for the refugium. We have some, with advanced CNC equipment and stuff, we can actually cut out circles, we can cut out shapes to let the water in, use 1 piece of plastic. But to keep this simple, you can use 2 separate pieces of plastic, one above the other with a gap. Okay, that first chamber most people put in a skimmer. There are different size skimmers out there. But if you have a skimmer that's only going to take up 6 inches of your room, why would you set your baffle 12 inches away? You just took up a lot of space for your refugium area. You know, where you put your macroalgae, live rock, etc. You really don't want to do that. You know, you want as much room in the refugium as possible. And for that reason, adjust your baffles accordingly to what you're doing. You know, in our standard filters, we leave the first chamber about 8 inches. That accommodates for a smaller filter most aftermarket skimmers. On the bigger ones, we open it up to 12 inches. You know, if you have a 3-foot filter, generally you'll probably use a bigger skimmer. Usually most people use either external or a little submersible pump, so we leave our return chamber only 6 inches. We try to get the rest of the area in the refugium area, the middle area. And of course we have that little bubble area, which you can add bio balls or not to help break up the bubbles. But the importance of that is as you're building it, there's no set rule where you can move your baffles. I would put your first baffle wherever you need to accommodate your filter. You want enough room for hands to get in there for your pumps, etc. But you don't want to, bless you.
Thank you.
But you don't want to give yourself a lot of extra room and take from your refugium. So move it over to where you need to move it over. You don't have to follow the directions that it's exactly 6 inches or exactly 8 inches. Same goes for the last chamber. I have 6 inches there. Really, if you have an external pump, you don't need that much. You just need enough for the bulkhead that connects it. And 4 inches I find generally is enough for a person's hand to get down there. And you can you know, be able to undo your bulkhead, etc. So you may want to move that last chamber to only 4 inches. If you're using submersible pumps, and they're good sized pumps, and maybe you're going to use 2 pumps, you might want to make that return chamber 8 inches to accommodate those pumps to be able to get your hand down there. Also, the return area is what the water level fluctuates depending on evaporation, etc. So, you know, feel free to move your baffles where you need to accommodate it. It's pretty simple, just move them to the dimension that you need. But try to keep your middle chamber as large as possible. I mean, that's your chamber, that's the purpose of the refugium. Granted, it will hold your skimmer. Feel free to take all the baffles out if you just want a plain sump. It will work fine. Although I would tend to use 1/4 inch material. Don't get thin cheaper with 3/16 material because you don't have no baffles to help support it. I also tend to, when I build a sump without baffles, I tend to put framework on the side also. It's pretty simple to do as opposed to the front and back only. Which the reason I do that is so you have access to hang things and stuff from your filter. You can add just 1 baffle. You can do just about any configuration you want. There's enough information on the tape to give you the basics to where it would be easy enough for you to insert a baffle, reduce a baffle, get it away, change the dimension of a baffle, give you more space. You can totally redesign the whole unit. The technique is the same. You know, generally you get the front on of the unit, get your framework on, you get your sides on, and then you put your baffles where you need them. Flip the unit over and put it on your back. And then you glue your bottom on, obviously, thereafter. You always do that order, whether or not you're building it with 1 baffle, 2 baffle, 3, 4. I've even seen units with 6 baffles. Even corner overflows built in there with socks, you know. Even no baffles. You still do it in that order. That is the best order. It's professionally the way it's done by most manufacturers, and that will work. Okay? As I said, like I always say, please email me or contact me if you have any more specific questions or any way I can help with this subject or anything else. Okay, Zombie Slayer, what's our next question?
A little explanation on bending the acrylic.
I think he's had one too many energy drinks, I'll tell you. But, okay. Bending the acrylic and stuff is a whole nother lesson in itself. But believe me, you can do it out of your home, out of your garage. You can do it professionally. You can build your own benders pretty inexpensively that can give you professional quality bends, both for your filters, aquariums, other acrylic and plastic needs. Even in shops where I've had dozens of employees, I have used benders that we manufactured ourselves. The commercial ones are a fortune and they're not necessary. There'll be other booklets, ebooks, there'll be other videos on how to build your own benders. That's way too extensive to get into here. There's many different types. We build ones with big Chromalox type heating elements. We build ones with toaster wire. We build ones with using Marinite type heating material, which is a ceramic composite. We build ones using aluminum channel. We build units with just straight nichrome wire. And as I said, we'll have in future tapes if interested, you know, whole lessons on that. But some general explanations on bending. You know, things like the contact benders you see from Craftiques, all that, they're functional utilitarian, even though it might take a half an hour to bend something. You tend to see the mark off on the acrylic. You know, it's not something you want to bend for a decent quality job, so it's not something I would necessarily go for. But The benders themselves are pretty inexpensive to build. They work well. They can work off 110 volts and can be done easily out of your home. Even multi-bender setups. I commonly use 6 benders at a time, and you know, bend fancy octagon shaped things and stuff like that. Generally, what you want to do to heat an area is to put some heat in a given area. Generally, what most people do is called line bending. They want to bend an angle, usually 90 degrees, but it can be anything. You want to heat up a small line. You have to concentrate that heat. The temperature that you want to build the material to varies, but generally for acrylic is about 300 degrees, 325 degrees. It can vary from about 280, 275 to 350, but depending on the brand, type, and density of material. You want to slowly bring that up to temperature, that area. You want to bring it up evenly. Obviously a thin material like 1/8 inch or 16th inch material, you can bend that in a minute flat, less even, because you know, you're not penetrating too much material to heat up. If your heating unit's very hot, what you're going to do is you're going to bubble the surface of the plastic well before you transfer the heat through. So you want to keep your heat fairly low, say 300 degrees. You'll want to turn your material over back and forth, so that, especially when material say 3/16 and greater, 1/4 inch. If you're doing 3/8 or 1/2 inch or something, it's mandatory, but you have to turn it over and heat it carefully. This goes for any thermoplastic, you know, ABS plastic, polycarbonate, PETGs, you know, anything that comes under the term thermoplastic can be bent in the same manner. You know, we could bend the filters, we could bend aquariums, etc. And in some cases, especially production, it might be worth it. There's things to remember that, like when you bend, you'll end up with what I call nipples on the end, where they expand out. You have to deal with that. Whether they're filed, whether you have to trim them off, there's a lot of techniques. But, you know, there's reasons why you probably want to stay away from bending at this point. But it does add a nice aesthetic appeal to it, and you know, there's production reasons why you might want to bend the material. It's also fun, it's neat. We've actually put plastic in the oven, but now you're heating the whole unit, and it's going to distort it and be a real big problem therein. But there are some times when heating the whole piece, you know, can actually lend itself to certain projects. If you're interested in learning how to build benders and to get into the bending aspect, you know, drop me a line. If I see enough interest, I'll definitely come up with a report and a video on how to actually build different type heater units and how to use them effectively and stuff. There's a bit of an art to it, but it isn't complex. It isn't something that you need to spend thousands of dollars on commercial bending units. As I said, even in our most largest production units, we actually used all custom built benders, and there's no reason why you can't. Okay, Zombie Slayer.
Wow.
What's the next question?
Well, Master Wind Rider, we have the last question is the same thing, a little explanation on flame polishing.
Okay, polishing in itself is an aesthetic thing. It also allows you to keep the edges from cutting yourself and other people. So, you know, there's quite a number of reasons why you polish. As far as your personal projects at home, obviously I wouldn't recommend flame polishing. You're going to need some equipment for that. It's not extremely costly, and then in a professional arena it's not whatsoever. But if you're just building 1 or 2 filters at home, you're just going to want to hand polish the units. Obviously you can't do intricate shapes and stuff like that, but there are ways to get a very good quality edge. One of the easiest ways, and not having to do it by hand and killing yourself, is just use a little buffing wheel. You can buy little buffing wheels for $5 that have an arbor that connect to your drill. Make sure it's a very soft wheel and stitched. You want it stitched, you don't want everything flailing everywhere. You know, a nice stitched buffing wheel, usually 5-6 inches. There's different polishes that you can buy. You can use believe it or not, instead of buying these fancy rouge sticks and blocks and stuff, you can just use a Craftique polish. When I had showed you the cleaner, which is in the blue bottle here, they also come with scratch and polish is in finer grits, the red and green bottle. The red bottle is for fine scratch removal, and the green bottle is for very deep scratches. You can actually use this to polish your edges. I would recommend the red bottle. Number 2 it's called, Novus number 2. All it is an acrylic rouge. Pretty much like if you have an acrylic paint job on your car and you get a scratch remover, you can use this as a polishing, for your polishing. You take your edge, make sure it's clean. If you see any saw marks in or anything like that, you sand them out first. I would reduce and keep sanding, you know, start out with say 80, 100 grit, go to 220. I would then go to 400 or 600 wet sand, even 1,000 wet sand. The finer the grit you go before you go to your buffing wheel and polish, the easier and quicker you'll be able to get a beautiful edge polishing. As I said, you can, you know, contact some places, look on the resource list in the ebook. It will give you places to buy the rouge and stuff to use it. You know, they're usually in little blocks and you rub it onto the buffing wheel. But this stuff works fine. And, you know, just apply a little bit, let it dry for a few seconds, just start buffing it. Go back and forth in even strokes, buffing the edges. Obviously you can do it by hand, but it would take forever. But you want to buff the edges this way. Once you buff it, it leaves a coating on it. You're going to want to clean it up pretty good with glass cleaner, etc. It might take 2 or 3 times to get the finish that you like. If you really want to go the more professional route with flame polishing, what's involved is it's a setup like welding, okay? You know, there's a lot of gases you can weld with, but you generally use a brazing handle, okay, and a mixer. So you're gonna have to buy yourself the hoses, you're gonna have to buy a mixing handle, you're gonna have to actually buy the tips and stuff. I actually have one over here. Let me see if I get it for you. This here is what the mixing handle looks like. You have a tip here, your mixing handle. You use 2 different types of gases. The green is generally the oxygen, and the red is your gas that you're using that it feeds off as fuel. For flame polishing plastic, you want to use hydrogen gas. I know it sounds dangerous, and in essence I don't want to say it isn't dangerous. But I've used it safely for about 25 years. You buy your, oh shoot, bear fell down. Zombie Slayer will lose it if his bear gets hurt. I'll put him back up here on the table. You're going to also, as I said, need a couple of regulators, an oxygen regulator. A setup like this with 2 regulators, a hose, the mixing handle, you're looking at around $400 or $500 new. The tanks, you can buy your tanks with gas for a couple $100 a piece, but usually you would rent them about $10 a month. The gas lasts a long time. A 5-foot tank of gas, if you're just doing a few filters a week, will last you a year. You know, they're only about $20 a fill. Obviously you get one with oxygen, one with hydrogen. A few little secrets. If you look at your techniques and specs, they're saying use like 8 pounds of hydrogen to 5 pounds of oxygen, etc. Generally what you want to do to start your flame is you put your hydrogen gas on a little bit. You turn the knob till you're barely hearing it and you light it with a sparker. Then you turn your oxygen very carefully and you want a nice medium flame. You almost don't see it, it's clear. You can adjust how fine the flame is depending on the edge that you're doing. Tends to be clear to very light blue. Obviously the more oxygen, the finer the point of the flame and the hotter it is. The reason they use hydrogen is it burns clean. You try acetylene, you'll end up getting soot on it. If you're very careful, there are ways to almost do it, but it is so difficult. So to do it without getting the soot on it, the black soot, is very difficult. Propane isn't hot enough, although we have tried using it before, and if you go back and forth enough, you can almost a little bit. We've even used butane in emergencies, you know, a butane lighter, you know, on site or something. But generally, for a very good quality job, because you don't want to overheat the scene, you have issues there too. You know, you want to flame quickly. You do it like a painter, going back and forth, not concentrating your heat in any one area. If not, you'll end up later on getting crazing from the heat expanding. I mean, it's very hot gas. But the hydrogen burns clean. You don't end up with any marks, etc. I'd still clean your edges with cleaner before flaming, because if you burn dust, you'll actually see little black spots where the dirt is, etc. But as I said, if you happen to have it, obviously it's different regulators for the hydrogen than it is for acetylene. You can't use the same regulators. Make sure your mixing handle is safe for hydrogen, oxygen. So you have to go to a welder's supply and buy the appropriate equipment for hydrogen, oxygen, for brazing. You're using a brazing tip, not a cutting tip. So I mean, $400 or $500, and then you're in. So you need to justify quite a few filters, etc. for that. You know, if you someday want to get into the business of filter building, which can be done out of your home, etc., maybe you'll warrant it. But as I said, just for a couple of filters, go buy yourself a buffing wheel. You're a lot better off for that. Here, let me put this back. I think that pretty much does it for the questions that were at the end of the chapter. Any other additional questions you have, feel free, please, to contact me. I try to put the email address, etc., and website throughout the unit. I appreciate everything. You know, I tried to gear this for the home user. You know, so many people think it's such a, you know, working with plastic is such a mystery. It's hard to get lessons anywhere on it. Most plastic fabricators are very, you know, crazy about keeping their secrets. But it's not much different than woodworking, as I've shown on the unit, and it really can be done in a home workshop type atmosphere. So, as I said, anything else I can help you with, please feel free. I really want you to get something out of this little course. I really want you to be able to build your own filters. If you're just building one or two, you don't want to buy whole sheets of plastic, or you don't have saws and want to buy the blades, the kits are available. And I try to price them as reasonable as possible for you to save money on these filter units. Okay, most of the lessons we covered, we use the same thing to build the filters that you see. So even the ones that we sell on eBay or internet or wherever, they're actually built with these techniques. You truly will get a professional quality unit if you do it as we said, okay? Well, this is Windwire signing out. See you later, Zombie Slayer. Say goodbye to Bear, Cub, Blackie, they all say goodbye, and we thank you.
I pressed the red button, didn't I?